Meeting someone online and inviting them over for a first date sounds perfectly normal, but the story that we're about to get into isn't one of those stories. When Armin Meiwes met burned brands in an online message board, neither man wanted to begin a romance. In fact, what transpired during their first meeting turned out to be a disturbing yet fascinating case, blurring the lines between fantasy and the nature of consent. So, let's get into the story. Let's start from the very beginning. Armin Meiwes was born on December 1st, 1961 in Germany. As a child, he was obsessed with the German fairy tale Hansel and Gretel, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with Hansel and Gretel, it's a German story about a witch living in the woods who tries to cook and eat two abandoned children who trespass into her cottage. Further into this story, you'll understand why he was so obsessed with Hansel and Gretel. Armin and his family were the picture-perfect family in the beginning, and when he was a child, they moved into this gigantic 36-room farmhouse in Rothenburg, Germany, where he ran around, rode horses with his brothers, and he described his early childhood as perfect and lovely. Later on, though, when Armin turned 8, his parents divorced and his father left the family, taking all of their money with him. He said he vividly remembers seeing his father drive away and running after him, screaming for him to stop, while his father just stared straight ahead and ignored his young, devastated son. Years later, his brother would follow suit and leave the home as well, just like their father did. After his siblings and father left, he began dealing with feelings of abandonment and an overwhelming pressure to become the man of the house. Since feeling abandoned, he created this imaginary brother named Frankie, who he would tell his darkest secrets to. At such a young age, Armin just wanted someone to be with him forever, someone that wouldn't abandon him, and at such a young age, he was already feeling these feelings of wanting to consume human flesh, just so he can feel as though they weren't going to leave him. His mother, ever since his father left, was already divorced 3 times, was extremely overbearing. Whenever they were out in public together, she constantly berated him, and whenever women were interested in Armin, she would chase them away just to make sure that she was the only woman for him. Armin finally turned 18. He decided to join the army, and he did exceedingly well. And the army was something that he had been looking for this entire time. It was a sense of community, a sense of brotherhood. He didn't have to worry about feeling abandoned. And during the 12 years that he served, his fantasies of consuming human flesh just disappeared. After being discharged, Armin had to go home to his aging mother in their gigantic farmhouse where he grew up in. And while he was living with her, his mother ended up in a car accident, and she became almost impossible to live with because she was almost entirely bedbound. She was already a demanding woman, and she became even more demanding, and 3 years later, she ended up passing away from the accident. And that left Armin completely alone in their farmhouse. Now, at this point, Armin was free from structure from the army. He was free from his demanding mother. The feelings of consuming human flesh began to bubble up again, and he realized that he was finally able to do what he's been fantasizing about: consume human flesh. Still unsure and terrified of the idea of consuming human flesh, Armin started out by watching brutal and torture-pain pornography. Despite the graphic nature, it just didn't satisfy him, and the curiosity of the taste of human flesh still lingered in the back of his mind. Eventually, Armin found a message board devoted to finding people who wanted to be killed and eaten. A year later, after browsing the website, Armin finally built up the courage to post on this website that he found called Cannibal Cafe. He stated that he was looking for a well-built man between the ages of 18 and 30 to slaughter and consume. A whopping 200 people responded to Armin's request, all wanting to be killed and eaten. He met up with several of these applicants, but they all left the meeting with cold feet. And Armin was very adamant about not keeping people against their will. So as soon as they showed signs of hesitation, he cut off contact and let them all go. One of the best examples of a potential victim being let go was a man named Dirk Miller. Dirk explained that he met with Armin, who had chained him up per Dirk's request, and stuck pieces of paper to his body that showed what cut of meat each section would be. Dirk Miller eventually changed his mind though during the process and was freely let go without any trouble. After Dirk was let go, the search began again, and this brings us to a man named Bernd Brands, a 43-year-old computer engineer who wanted to be eaten. And just like Armin, he visited Cannibal Cafe. Brands had a troubled life and was looking to fill the void he was experiencing. His mother committed suicide when he was just 5 years old, and he came out as gay to his father. His father stopped talking to him. Somewhere along the lines, Bernd Brands developed a significant pain fetish. He would even go as far as to pay sex workers to satisfy his needs, and at one point he offered all of his money and his belongings for a worker to bite off his penis. On February 14th, Bernd Brands received a message on Cannibal Cafe from Armin. The two exchanged messages for weeks discussing boundaries and exactly how Armin would kill and eat Brands. They even went so far to discuss what Armin should do with his body afterwards. Nearly a month later, Armin and Brands finally met. Brands was very comfortable when they met. As soon as they reached Armin's big farm home, Brands immediately stripped naked and told Armin to admire his dinner. At this point, they both walked to the second floor, and Armin showed him his slaughterhouse that he made in one of the rooms. It was equipped with a bed, a butcher table, and even a meat hook. While on the bed together, Brands quickly realized that Armin just didn't have the strength to inflict the amount of pain that he was looking for. At that moment, Brands changed his mind about the whole thing. Since Armin wasn't interested in forcing anyone to do anything, as soon as Brands removed his consent, he drove him to the train station. But once they arrived at the train station, Bernd Brands changed his mind once more, but requested they stop at the store for sleeping pills and cough medicine so he could calm his mind enough for Armin to be able to go through with their original plan. When they finally arrived at the farmhouse again, Brands just looked at Armin and said, "I can't stand it anymore, just cut it off." So Armin set up his camera to record the night and went to work attempting to cut off Brands' penis. The first knife was much too dull, but the second one was able to complete a quick amputation, while Brands screamed horribly during the whole thing. Disturbingly, before they both decided to amputate his penis, they agreed that they would share the penis as Brands' last meal. So Armin cut Brands' penis in half, blanched and seasoned it, and then pan-fried the pieces. 3 hours later, at about 9 p.m., Armin realized that Brands was starting to feel cold, and so Armin went to the bathroom, started running a hot bath, and placed Brands in the bathtub so he can essentially pass away. And so during this process, Armin went to his room, grabbed a book, and started reading. 2.5 hours later, Armin went to check on Brands. He found him woozy but still alive, and so Armin took him out of the bath, brought him to the slaughterhouse, put him on the bed, and during this entire time, Brands was coming in and out of consciousness in the slaughter room. For some reason, Brands kept trying to get out of bed, but he couldn't. At this point, Armin was looking at Brands and he thought about calling the ambulance. But he didn't at the last second because of what they agreed to before, and he thought about his lifelong fantasy just slipping through his fingers and disappearing. Then at 2:30 a.m., Armin finally decided to end Brands' life by slitting his throat. At this point, Armin knew he was able to fulfill his dark fantasy, and the internet provided him with enough information on how to butcher a human. So Armin took him to the slaughterhouse, decapitated Brands, and hung him up on his meat hook like he would with a cow, removed all of his organs, and cut his body in half. His first meal of the night consisted of a piece of Brands' back that he ate on his best dinnerware along with red wine and potatoes. After his dinner, he packed up the rest of the body he butchered and placed him in the freezer. A while later, he worked his way through the meat that was already in his freezer, and he posted on Cannibal Cafe again, looking for another victim. And once again, he received a lot of interest. In November of 2002, an Austrian student responded to Armin's request, just out of curiosity, and he wanted to learn about Armin's experience. While they were in contact with each other, though, Armin admitted that the Austrian student wouldn't have been his first if he were to go through with it. And so that freaked out the Austrian student, and so he ended up calling the police. And about a month later, the police raided Armin's home and they found 15 pounds of Brand's body tucked away in the freezer along with the recording from that night. On July 17, 2003, Armin was charged with murder. He pushed for a conviction called killing on demand because his argument was that burned brands came to him on his own free will and demanded to be killed and eaten. Roughly 6 months later, after the original conviction, they did a retrial and Armin was eventually charged with manslaughter. The prosecution didn't agree with this conviction either, so one more retrial later, and in April of 2005, he was charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison. Armin Meiwes says he regrets what he did that night and wouldn't go through with it if given the chance. Reportedly now, Armin Meiwes is a vegetarian.